What do you do when it feels as though the whole world has forgotten God? What do you do when truth seems outnumbered, when people choose what is easy instead of what is right, and when faith feels like a lonely road? This is the story of Elijah, and the fire from heaven. It is the story of one man who stood against an entire nation, one man who refused to bow, one man who believed that even when everyone else was silent, God was still in control. Israel was living through a dark time. King Ahab ruled the nation, and he had led the people away from God. His wife, Jezebel, encouraged the worship of Baal, a false god whom many believed controlled rain, storms, crops, and fertility. Altars to God were torn down, false prophets were honored, and little by little, the people of Israel began to forget the God who had delivered them, guided them, and protected them through generations. But there was one man who would not forget. His name was Elijah. Elijah came before King Ahab with a message that no one wanted to hear. He told the king that there would be no rain in the land, not for months, not for a season, but for years unless God commanded it. And then Elijah disappeared. The drought began. At first, people may not have worried, but days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. The rivers became shallow, the fields became dry, the crops failed, animals grew weak, families struggled to find food and water. The land that once depended on rain from heaven became dry and broken, and all across Israel, people were forced to face a difficult question. If Baal was truly the god of rain, why had he done nothing? During this time, God told Elijah to hide near a small brook. There, Elijah drank from the water, and ravens brought him food each morning and evening. But eventually, even the brook dried up. Then God sent Elijah to a small town called Zarephath. There he met a widow gathering sticks. Outside her home, she had almost nothing left, only a little flour in a jar and a small amount of oil in a container. She was preparing one final meal for herself and her son, but Elijah asked her to trust God. He told her not to be afraid. He promised that if she obeyed, the flour would not run out and the oil would not fail until rain returned to the land. The widow had a choice. She could hold tightly to the little she had left, or she could trust God with what seemed too small to give. She chose faith, and day after day, the jar of flour was not empty. The oil did not run dry. In the middle of a famine, in a house with almost nothing, God provided enough, not all at once, not a warehouse full of food, but enough for each day. Sometimes, that is how faith works. God may not always show us the entire path, but He gives us enough light for the next step. 3 years passed. The drought continued. The land was exhausted. The people were desperate. King Ahab was angry. Then God told Elijah that it was time to return. Elijah went back to meet Ahab. When the king saw him, he accused Elijah of being the one who had brought trouble to Israel. But Elijah did not run. He did not hide. He told Ahab that the real trouble had come because the king and the people had abandoned God and followed false gods. Then Elijah made a challenge. He told Ahab to gather the people of Israel on Mount Carmel. He also called for the prophets of Baal. The mountain became a place of decision. On one side stood Elijah, the only prophet of God openly standing there. On the other side stood hundreds of prophets devoted to Baal. The people watched in silence. Elijah looked at them and asked a question that still matters today. How long will you try to stand between two different paths? How long will you say you believe in God while giving your heart to something else? If the Lord is truly God, follow Him. But if Baal is God, then follow Baal. The people had no answer. Then Elijah proposed a test. 2 altars would be built. 2 sacrifices would be prepared. The prophets of Baal would call on their God. Elijah would call on the Lord, but no one would light the fire. The God who answered by fire would be shown to be the true God. The prophets of Baal went first. They prepared their altar. They placed the sacrifice upon it from morning until noon. They cried out to Baal. They shouted. They danced around the altar. They begged their God to answer, but nothing happened. No voice came from heaven. No fire fell. No one answered. Hour after hour passed. Their cries became louder. Their movements became more desperate, but Baal remained silent. The altar stood untouched. The sacrifice remained cold. And then Elijah called the people closer. He repaired the broken altar of the Lord using 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel. was a reminder that God had not forgotten his people, even when they had forgotten him. Elijah placed the wood on the altar, he prepared the sacrifice, then he did something that made no sense to anyone watching. He ordered water to be poured over the altar, not once, not twice, but again and again. Water covered the sacrifice. Water soaked the wood. Water filled the trench around the altar. There could be no trick. There could be no hidden flame. If fire came now, everyone would know where it had come from. Then Elijah prayed. He did not shout. He did not dance. He did not try to impress the crowd. He simply asked God to show the people that he was still the true God, and that their hearts could return to him. Then heaven answered. Fire fell from the Lord. It consumed the sacrifice. It consumed the wood. It consumed the stones. It consumed the dust, and even the water in the trench disappeared. The entire mountain saw it. The people fell face down to the ground, and they cried out, "The Lord, he is God! The Lord, he is God!" For years, the people had followed silence. They had waited for an answer from a false god, but on Mount Carmel, they saw the difference between an empty idol and the living God. Elijah had stood alone. He had been outnumbered. He had been opposed. He had faced a king, a nation, and hundreds of false prophets. But Elijah was never truly alone, because one person standing with God is never standing alone. After this, Elijah told King Ahab that rain was coming. The sky was still clear. The ground was still dry. There was no storm in sight. But Elijah trusted God before he saw the evidence. He sent his servant to look toward the sea. The servant returned and said there was nothing. Elijah told him to go again. Still nothing. Again, Elijah told him to look 6 times. The answer was the same. Nothing. But the 7th time, the servant saw a small cloud in the distance, no bigger than a man's hand. It looked small, almost insignificant, but Elijah knew what it meant. The rain was coming. Soon, the sky grew dark, the wind began to rise, and, after years of drought, rain poured down upon the land. The drought was over, the silence was broken, and the God of Israel had shown that he was still God. This story is not only about fire falling from heaven. It is about choosing faith when faith feels unpopular. It is about trusting God when the evidence has not appeared yet. It is about refusing to give your heart to things that cannot truly save you. Sometimes, you may feel like Elijah. You may feel alone in your beliefs. You may feel surrounded by doubt, pressure, fear, or voices telling you to compromise. But do not forget this. God does not need a crowd to reveal his power. He can work through one faithful person. He can bring rain after a long drought. He can bring light into a place that has been dark for years, and he can answer in ways greater than we ever expected. Thank you for watching Bible Stories Unfolded. If this story encouraged you, consider subscribing for more timeless Bible stories, meaningful lessons, and faith for everyday life.